Chapter 36. But it had to end. In the wake of the Digby Weekly Courier's big announcement, its competitors divided into two camps, those who awaited the special edition with bated breath and those possessed of a decidedly more cynical view of the upcoming extravaganza. Whether it was the green-eyed monster alone that prompted the backlash is difficult to discern. Jealousy is easily hidden in critique. The Annapolis Spectator may have trounced its competition by being first on the Wheeler confessional bandwagon, but the Digby Weekly Courier made it perfectly clear that its goal was to commandeer the vehicle and ride it, solo and triumphant, across the finish line. The folks at the Morning Chronicle saw it as their mission to ensure that did not happen. If other papers planned to simply roll over and accept the Courier as alpha, the Chronicle had no intention of joining them. The paper was also prepared to play rough. By this point in the twisted tale of Peter Wheeler, it was virtually impossible to know how much of any particular news account was true and what could be believed. To this day, there is no means of verifying many of their assertions. Journalists seemed free to take considerable liberties and, at times, offer up outright deceptions. While some exercises in poetic license remain glaringly obvious, other amended vignettes buried in the wreckage are harder to categorize. When it comes to the honesty, integrity, and reliability of the press, one of the greatest innovations of all time was the introduction of the byline. Forcing correspondents to put their name, and often face, to their words caused a good many to rethink their approach to reporting. In the age before credited stories, which unfortunately included the Wheeler era, the reporter's anonymity provided the perfect shield against accountability. Stories could rarely be traced to their source, much less their sources. As was often the case, particularly with the smaller weekly tabloids, it was possible there were no actual reporters at all. The news such papers belched forth was nothing more than a reprint of wire service issue and openly plagiarized rehashing of the larger dailies compiled by a lone editor or publisher. In such a tenuous environment, all accounts of reporters holding private interviews with Peter Wheeler, which were legion in the lull between the court interviews with Peter Wheeler, which were legion in the lull between the court and the gallows, must be viewed with a skeptical eye. No jail records survive and there is no independent means of confirming whether the visits even occurred, much less what was said. Since no correspondent's name was directly linked to a story, the checks and balances that hold fabrication at bay were minimal and the temptation to embellish was more than some reporters could bear. By the end of August a strange normalcy had descended on the Digby jailhouse. Wheeler, having called his barren cell home for the past few months, settled into a daily routine. He met each morning with a few prayers and a crust or two of his moldy prison fare. Then Peter would prepare to receive his guests, the day's allotment of journalists and other notables who had secured an audience through the largesse of his guardian, Sheriff Benjamin Van Blarcom. As September dawned and Wheeler's time on Earth dwindled to a handful of days, one particular morning brought two red-letter visitors. The first was an unnamed correspondent from the Morning Chronicle. The second, at least according to the first, was Matilda Comeau. The ever-shifting sentiments and loyalties of Bear River had become quicksand beneath Wheeler's feet. Tarred, feathered, and pilloried by his cronies and detractors alike, Peter found himself without a friend in the world. Only Tilly Comeau had stood by him, whether out of a mother's love or something more carnal. Whatever had passed between them, whatever understanding they once enjoyed, the relationship had endured long after Wheeler's more fair-weather companions had abandoned his sinking ship, as rats notoriously do. Tilly's visit was much welcomed by Wheeler, who despaired of ever seeing her again. As the Chronicle noted, she had promised to come from Bear River last Tuesday to see him, but when that day and the remaining days passed without her putting in an appearance, he began to lament over his disappointment and feared that he would never meet her again on Earth. When Tilly finally cropped up at the cell block door, Wheeler's joy was evident to all. She reportedly made her apologies and excuses, saying she was employed every day and could not afford to lose a day's labor. Always on the lookout for drama, be it real or manufactured, the Chronicle rep let slip that Tilly's absence had nothing to do with her work schedule. It required a number of urgent messages to induce her to pay Wheeler another visit, as she had no particular wish to see him again. One key element of drama, however, is unpredictability. Having just informed his readers of her supposed reticence, the reporter suddenly shifted emotional gears, noting that tears were shed copiously on both sides, Tilly Comeau seeming to feel the situation fully as deeply as did the man whose crime has brought him to the gallows. It seems the reporter was having difficulty taking the emotional temperature of the room. Although the Chronicle correspondent was willing to go with the fervent ebb and flow of the moment, he had arrived with his own agenda. His task for the day was to expose the sordid details of the Digby Weekly Courier's purchase of Wheeler's final words, and the love story quickly gave way to more pressing financial matters. There was a little business to transact, said the Chronicle, regarding the proceeds from the sale of Wheeler's confession to be published this week, of which one half is to be given to whoever Peter designates. The report fails to note exactly how the Morning Chronicle became privy to such information. At no point does the reporter suggest Wheeler was his source, and it was unlikely anyone at the Digby tabloid had been so loose with the specifics of their contract. What was clear was that the Chronicle hoped to unmask the Courier's hypocrisy. In spite of the Digby Courier's wall-to-wall promotion of its special edition, it was careful not to appear too venal. The paper never once revealed that it had paid for the publication rights. Indeed, it maintained its normal haughty tone, implying such mercenary ploys were beneath the organization's dignity. If one accepts the Chronicle's contract claims at face value, one must also accept the paper's report as to the identity of Wheeler's designate, his longtime landlady love. Peter wants Tilly Comeau to receive this money to do with as she pleases. According to the Morning Chronicle, what pleased Tilly was to give the money to her youngest son, Walter, as she does not want it herself and would not use it for her own benefit. How much Wheeler was paid for his confession was never stated, a frustrating omission. At this juncture, the once emotional meeting takes a discernibly legal turn. An agreement was drawn up this afternoon giving Tilly all of Wheeler's meager worldly possessions, including his share of the proceeds. Who drew up this agreement was not stipulated, another glaring omission. As the documents were being signed and duly executed, the Chronicle added one last brushstroke to complete its tableau. The reporter offered up a strident variation on the Tilly's wanton harlot theme by stating that Wheeler paused during the transaction and besought her with all the Christian eloquence at his command to turn from the error of her ways, and join the Christian throng. Tilly made no such promises. Having failed to save her immortal soul or even line her earthly pockets, Wheeler was forced to bid Tilly a heartbreaking farewell. In prose both purple and prosaic, the Chronicle brought the couple's love story to an abrupt halt, but it had to end at last, and Tilly bore herself from the embrace of the condemned man and mounted the stairway from the jail basement, crying bitterly. 10 minutes later she was on her way back to Bear River. Readers could not help but think a precious opportunity had been squandered. Still, the reporter's gambit paid off, no matter how clumsy its execution. The headline story struck a chord with romantics, cynics, and sinners alike. His scenario encompassed all the necessary narrative elements, a classic tale of unrequited love, the perils of crass commercialism, and last-minute redemption, all neatly tied together in a bow that strangled its chief rival, the Digby Weekly Courier. Once the Morning Chronicle had let the Courier's well-kept secret out of the bag, the lesser papers piled on. The Digby Weekly Courier's special edition suddenly seemed less of a media coup and more of a triumph of checkbook journalism. The Digby Weekly Courier, which had so callously led the chorus taunting Tilly Comeau for her wanton ways, now found itself exposed as the media whore it truly was. If the Courier took home the gold medal in media slatternliness, the silver went to a relative unknown, a local barber by the name of Charles Trask. The deluge of press coverage afforded every one of Wheeler's visitors invariably caught the attention of the wily Mr. Trask, who saw an opportunity for a little free advertising. It all began innocently enough, a refrain familiar to every John ever busted in a solicitation sweep. Barber Trask, who owned a shop in the town of Digby, offered to give the accused a final shave and a haircut, sending him to the hereafter looking his very best. Van Blarcom approved the request with no concern as to Wheeler's wishes. As expected, Trask's pilgrimage to death row garnered plenty of media interest, if for no other reason than the introduction of a straight razor into the cell of a condemned man under suicide watch. The visit left many wondering what Van Blarcom could possibly have been thinking. So great were public fears that Wheeler might have grabbed the razor and hurt himself or others that Trask later amended his account by saying he had demanded the prisoner's arms be bound behind his back. The barber's belated histrionics were good copy, but there had been little need for such precautions. Peter made no effort to seize the blade or run his visitor through. Rather, Wheeler spent their time together offering words of advice and comfort to the barber, counseling him to turn his back on temptation and become a Christian. Trask later told reporters he was so moved by his encounter that he assured Wheeler he would lead a better life from that day forward. However self-serving Trask's initial intentions might have been, he had gained not only his sought-after publicity but a whole new spiritual outlook on life. For days following the visit Trask made the rounds, sharing his redemption song with every news organ in the Maritimes. In addition to printing Wheeler's healing prescription, most articles provided directions to Trask's barbershop. Other local merchants could not help but notice the upswing in business such notoriety brought Trask and his razor, and they were soon clamoring to get in on the act. Charles Mason, a shoe and boot dealer in Digby, provided Wheeler with a new pair of black patent leather shoes for his final walk to the gallows. Although Mason claimed he made the gift out of the goodness of his heart, he later expressed disappointment that, while every paper had noted the prisoner's shiny new footwear, only the Morning Chronicle had identified him as the donor. Corporate sponsorship of Wheeler's impending execution quickly took on a life of its own. The Salvation Army received front-page coverage for their gift to the condemned, a pair of black trousers and a crisp white shirt. The ensemble was meant to serve double duty, to be worn at both the execution and as Wheeler's burial suit. Having read the accounts of Wheeler's shameful death house diet, a number of bakeries and local restaurants delivered meals to the prisoner, although the honor of making his last meal went to the sheriff's own wife. Local outfitters offered much-needed rope for the noose, while a well-known carpentry firm made quick work of a coffin. These feints of altruism began to rub the reading public the wrong way. A few of the more vocal throng questioned why there were no such signs of generosity at the funeral of Annie Kempton. To stem the tide of publicity seekers, the paper stopped printing the names of donors and the flood of donations instantly dried up.